They say a single moment can change the course of history. For the British monarchy, that moment arrived in a room hidden from cameras, away from the prying eyes of tabloids, away from the judgment of the world. Imagine a man, once celebrated as the nation's darling, now brought to his knees, his eyes wide with desperation, his hands trembling, pleading for a chance to reclaim a life he walked away from. That man was Prince Harry, and the man he was begging? His older brother, Prince William. What happened in that room would shock the world, tear apart relationships, and force the royal family to confront a question it had never faced so directly. How far would a brother go to save, or destroy, another? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince Harry's fall from grace was dramatic, public, and controversial. The world had watched, some with sympathy, others with judgment, as the once beloved prince stepped back from his royal duties alongside his wife, Meghan Markle. The media dubbed it Megxit, and the headlines screamed betrayal, abandonment, and scandal. But behind the cameras, behind the headlines, Harry's struggle was far deeper than anyone realized. He was not just losing public favor. He was losing himself. Every decision he made, every step into the so-called freedom of private life, brought him further from the role he had trained his whole life to embody, and closer to isolation, ridicule, and regret. Meanwhile, Prince William had been carrying the weight of the crown in ways most of us cannot even imagine. The heir apparent was not just balancing public duties. He was navigating a family torn apart by grief, by scandal, by the legacy of a mother whose death left more questions than answers. William was expected to be stoic, to maintain the dignity of the institution, and to act with grace, even when those closest to him were spiraling into decisions that threatened everything he had worked to protect. And then, the unthinkable happened. Harry reached out to William, not through letters, not through mediators, but directly. He asked, no, he begged, for one thing, to be a working royal again. He fell on his knees, voice cracking, trying to convey the depth of his remorse, his longing, and the fear that he had irreversibly destroyed his own future. The image is almost cinematic. A prince, stripped of titles in the eyes of some, literally brought to his knees before his brother, seeking redemption, approval, and forgiveness. Can you imagine the pressure in that room? The tension so thick you could almost hear it cut with a knife? And William, poised, cautious, and commanding, was forced to decide in that moment whether to forgive, to empower, or to reject his brother forever. But why does this matter now? Why, after years of media coverage, leaked letters, and public speculation, should the world care about this private royal confrontation? Because this decision is not just about two brothers. It is about the monarchy itself, the legacy of Princess Diana, the balance of power in a family that symbolizes tradition, duty, and national pride. William's choice would ripple across continents, across headlines, and into the hearts and minds of millions who view the royal family not merely as public figures, but as symbols of stability or instability on the world stage. And yet, what makes this story gripping is not only the act of begging, but the context behind it. Harry did not arrive at this point lightly. He had endured relentless scrutiny, invasive media, and public criticism. He had struggled with his own identity, his role, and the perception that he was constantly in his brother's shadow. The emotional strain was immense, and the plea we will explore in detail was the culmination of years of tension, regret, and longing for approval. Imagine the vulnerability it takes to approach your sibling in such a state, knowing that any rejection could haunt you forever. At the same time, William was under immense pressure himself. As the future king, every decision he made would be dissected, criticized, and politicized. Granting Harry's request could be perceived as mercy, weakness, or strategic wisdom. Denying it could be interpreted as cruelty, familial coldness, or an act of self-preservation for the monarchy. The stakes were not merely personal. They were historical, national, and deeply intertwined with the public perception of the British royal family. Let's pause for a moment and consider the human element. Brothers, siblings, shared history, shared tragedy, shared responsibility. For all the pomp and protocol, the palace walls do not shield one from heartbreak, jealousy, or resentment. Could William see past Harry's public failures, and into the man he once adored as a little boy. Could Harry set aside pride, ego, and embarrassment long enough to ask for what he truly needed? This tension, this human drama, is what makes the story irresistible, emotional, and unforgettable. We also have to talk about the consequences of this plea. Reinstating Harry as a working royal would have ripple effects across charities, public engagements, and media narratives. It could reshape public opinion, affect ongoing family dynamics, and challenge the established hierarchy within the monarchy. On the other hand, refusal could deepen the rift, provoke media frenzy, and permanently alter how the public perceives both brothers. Every possible outcome carried weighty implications, and every second in that private room was charged with tension, expectation, and potential disaster. To make sense of it all, we have to dive deeper into the timeline, the private discussions, and the emotional currents that led to this extraordinary confrontation. Who advised William? Who whispered in Harry's ear? What role did Meghan Markle play behind the scenes? How did past misunderstandings, media manipulations, and family dynamics converge into this single explosive moment? And perhaps most importantly, what does this reveal about the future of the monarchy and the relationship between two of its most famous princes? For those watching, imagine yourself in Harry's shoes for just a moment. You've stepped back from your family's institution, distanced yourself from duties you trained for your entire life, and now you find yourself at the mercy of the one person who can grant you redemption. How do you summon the courage to ask? How do you deal with the fear of rejection, knowing that a no could resonate through history and be interpreted as familial betrayal? And then imagine being William, tasked with balancing love for your brother, duty to your family, and the eyes of the world. Every word, every gesture, every pause carries consequences beyond the room. And yet, despite all this pressure, despite the years of estrangement, the walls of secrecy, and the media circus surrounding them, a decision had to be made. What happened next was a moment of raw emotion, strategy, and human drama. It is a story of power and vulnerability, of pride and repentance, of loyalty and ambition. It is a story that no public statement, no interview, no headline could fully capture until now. As we move through this video, you will witness the entire arc, from the private plea to William's deliberation to the ripple effects across the family, the media, and the public consciousness. You will hear about moments that were hidden from cameras, conversations whispered behind closed doors, and emotions too intense to be published. You will see how history, personal ambition, love, and responsibility collided in a single, unforgettable event. And here is the question that will drive this story. Will William extend the hand of forgiveness and reinstate Harry, or will he cement a rift that could last a lifetime? The answer is more shocking than anyone could imagine. The implications are greater than most realize. And the consequences? They are just beginning to unfold. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the world you were born into suddenly turns its back on you? When the life you trained your entire existence for, the life everyone told you was your destiny, slips away, leaving only shadows, whispers, and the sting of public judgment. This was Harry's reality after Megxit. He had thought stepping back from royal duties would bring freedom, relief, perhaps even peace. He had thought that by moving to the United States, away from the scrutiny of the tabloids and the suffocating glare of tradition, he could reclaim his life. He was wrong. The isolation was immediate. The public, who once cheered for him, now debated him. Headlines painted him as reckless, entitled, and even ungrateful. Social media erupted with opinions, memes, and scathing commentary. And while Meghan's presence by his side provided some semblance of support, it could not shield him from the relentless judgment, the constant media scrutiny, and the deep, gnawing sense that he had abandoned his family and his duty. Each day felt like a trial. Each night brought loneliness that no mansion, no private jet, no celebrity friends could erase. Harry had lost more than a role. He had lost identity. Every interaction became a reminder of what he had left behind. Official engagements he could no longer attend, charitable initiatives that had relied on his participation, and the subtle yet undeniable presence of his brother William, who now carried the weight Harry once shared. And the worst part? Watching William adapt to the pressures he had just fled, watching him thrive in the very institution Harry had walked away from. Can you imagine that feeling? The jealousy? The envy? Not just of success, but of belonging, of relevance, of being needed. Harry's isolation wasn't just physical, it was existential. He was exiled from the life he was born into, exiled from a sense of purpose that had defined him since childhood. He had money, influence, and a global platform, yes. But money cannot buy forgiveness. Influence cannot replace acceptance. And a platform, however vast, cannot replicate the intimate bond of family, no matter how strained. It wasn't long before cracks began to appear in Harry's carefully constructed new life. The couple's American mansion, once seen as a symbol of freedom and luxury, started to feel like a gilded cage. The constant travel, high-profile appearances, and endless media obligations were not liberation. They were a different kind of pressure. Friends came and went, alliances shifted, and slowly, he realized that escaping the royal spotlight had not freed him from scrutiny. It had only changed its form. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the story was being retold in hushed tones. Courtiers, staff, and advisors debated Harry's choices. Some sympathized, some condemned, and others quietly feared the long-term implications of his estrangement. In many ways, his absence had created a vacuum that William, though stoic and disciplined, was struggling to fill. And yet, William also had to consider public perception, tradition, and the fragile balance of the monarchy. Harry's departure was not just a family matter. It was a national issue, a symbol of potential instability, and a test of the institution's resilience. And Harry knew it. That knowledge, more than anything, gnawed at him. He felt trapped between the freedom he had fought for and the consequences he had unleashed. Every public appearance became a performance, every interaction a carefully calculated risk. Did you know that Harry reportedly canceled multiple private events in the months after Megxit? Not because he was busy, but because he feared the public scrutiny would exacerbate his sense of failure? The irony is almost unbearable. He had left the royal fold to escape pressure, only to find it following him, relentless, in a different guise. Adding to the emotional turbulence were the constant reminders of family life without him. Birthdays, anniversaries, and public celebrations became painful markers of his absence. He was acutely aware that William was stepping into a role Harry had once occupied with ease, that Catherine was establishing a stable image that contrasted sharply with the chaos and controversy surrounding him. Every newspaper, every social media post, every televised event reinforced the narrative that he had chosen the path of rebellion, and the consequences were his alone to bear. But isolation isn't just external, it digs deep. In the private chambers of his California mansion, Harry faced himself in ways that were uncomfortable, even terrifying. He had to reconcile the image of himself as a brave, independent prince with the reality of his vulnerability, mistakes, and miscalculations. This internal struggle was compounded by his growing awareness of the emotional and symbolic weight he carried as Diana's son. The world expected him to embody her legacy, yet stepping away from the royal fold had made him feel as though he was betraying that very legacy. And so, desperation began to creep in. Not desperation for fame, money, or influence, but desperation for belonging, for validation, for the sense that he still had a place in the institution that had shaped him since birth. The irony is bitter. The very thing he had fled, the monarchy, the duties, the traditions, was now exactly what he longed for. And that longing became unbearable. Each day without it felt like a loss compounded. Each night without it felt like an exile in his own home. We have to pause here and consider something. Harry's journey was not linear. It was a roller coaster of triumphs and setbacks, of public acclaim and private agony. One moment, he could appear confident, charming, and self-assured at a media event. The next, he would retreat to his mansion, grappling with the full weight of regret and longing. This dichotomy created a tension that was almost unbearable, a tension that only grew as he realized that no amount of media-friendly appearances could replace the approval he craved from his brother, from his family, and from the institution he had abandoned. Audience, think about this. Have you ever wanted something so badly, only to realize that getting it might be impossible? That was Harry's reality. The life he had left behind was not just a role. It was an identity, a purpose, a piece of his soul. And now, every attempt to recreate that identity outside the royal framework only highlighted what he had lost. Friends, advisors, and supporters could offer temporary solace, but they could not restore what he had forfeited. And so, as months passed, the desperation intensified. Private conversations with Meghan became emotional, strained, and filled with tension. She offered counsel, comfort, and perspective, but she could not undo the isolation Harry felt. The media, always hungry for conflict, began to speculate wildly. Would he attempt to return? Would he confront William directly? Would there be a public reconciliation, or would the rift grow irreparable? Every headline, every rumor, every whisper reinforced the sense that time was running out, that the moment to act was fleeting. Then, the pivotal moment arrived. Harry, unable to bear the isolation any longer, made a decision that would shock everyone. He reached out to William, not through intermediaries, not through a public statement, but directly. And he did something no one had seen before. He fell on his knees, a gesture of humility, desperation, and raw emotion. He begged. He begged for a chance to be a working royal again, for a chance to reclaim a life he had walked away from, for validation, forgiveness, and a role in a family and institution that still defined him, whether he admitted it or not. Imagine that scene. A prince kneeling before his older brother, words stumbling over themselves in a torrent of emotion. A man who had faced wars, charitable crises, and public scrutiny, now confronting the most personal trial of all, the judgment of his own family. Can you feel the tension? Can you imagine the weight pressing down on William as he absorbed every word, every plea, every hint of desperation? This was a moment where decades of family history, personal choices, and public perception collided. And here's the kicker. Harry did not approach this moment lightly. He had deliberated, agonized, and strategized. Every word was carefully chosen, every gesture intentional. Yet, despite the calculated approach, there was an authenticity that could not be denied. The raw, unfiltered emotion of a brother asking for a second chance. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it really mean to be the future king? To carry the expectations of an entire nation on your shoulders while navigating the treacherous waters of family loyalty, public scrutiny, and personal desire? For Prince William, every day brought new challenges, new pressures, and new moments where the line between duty and personal emotion blurred beyond recognition. The room where Harry pleaded for reinstatement into royal life was more than a private confrontation. It was a collision of two worlds, a test of William's capacity to lead, and a window into the unbearable weight he had carried for years. William had spent decades preparing for this role. Since childhood, his life was structured, monitored, and meticulously planned to cultivate the next monarch. But preparation cannot shield you from the unexpected, nor can it ease the burden of responsibility when personal relationships are intertwined with national expectations. Every decision he made was not only a matter of personal morality, but a calculation with consequences for the monarchy itself. In recent years, William's life had grown exponentially more complex. The death of his mother, Princess Diana, left wounds that never fully healed. He and Harry were thrust into a public lens that distorted private grief into spectacle. Then came Charles's increasing age and health concerns, leaving William not only as the heir apparent, but also as a de facto leader in many royal matters. Every public appearance, every speech, every handshake was scrutinized, dissected, and evaluated. A misstep could become a headline, a misjudgment a national controversy. Yet the weight wasn't merely public, it was intensely personal. William had watched his brother struggle, distance himself, and make choices that were publicly criticized, privately agonizing, and emotionally challenging for their family. And in that context, Harry's plea was not just a request, it was an emotional earthquake. William had to process the brother he had grown up with, the man he saw on headlines, and the desperate sibling before him, all in the span of a single moment. William's private schedule was relentless. Meetings with advisors, strategy sessions for charitable initiatives, and preparation for diplomatic visits consumed his days. Yet despite this, he could not ignore Harry's crisis. It was not just about the monarchy's image or public perception, it was about family. The irony was cruel. While Harry's world had expanded with global travels, media ventures, and new opportunities, William's sphere had shrunk, defined by duty, tradition, and unyielding expectation. And yet, the pressure to perform, to appear unflappable, and to manage the institution's image weighed heavier with every passing hour. Consider this. William was not a man who could act impulsively. Every choice, every response, every word was meticulously considered. He had to weigh public opinion against private loyalty, long-term consequences against immediate emotional relief. And now, facing Harry's desperate plea, William was being forced into the most intimate and high-stakes decision of his life. The brothers' relationship was layered with complexity. Childhood memories of shared mischief, grief over Diana's death, and the bond of brotherhood were juxtaposed against rivalry, jealousy, and diverging life paths. William's mind raced as he considered the implications of his decision. Accepting Harry back as a working royal could mend fences, restore family unity, and offer public redemption. Yet it also risked political backlash, media frenzy, and the perception of favoritism. Rejecting Harry could cement a rift, invite scrutiny, and provoke long-term resentment. And then there was the public dimension. Social media had become an omnipresent force in the royal narrative. Every move, every gesture, every comment was instantly amplified, dissected, and debated. Public sentiment could swing wildly within hours, influenced by the slightest rumor or unverified report. William had to anticipate not just the immediate reaction, but the cascading effects across international media, charitable organizations, and political observers. Could he reconcile family loyalty with public responsibility? Could he protect the monarchy's image while responding authentically to his brother's plea? William's advisors were already weighing in. Some argued for strict boundaries. Harry had made his choices, stepped back, and now had to accept the consequences. Others pushed for reconciliation, noting the long-term benefits of public unity and the restoration of family cohesion. The palace had never faced a situation like this, one brother kneeling before another, not in public, but in a private room that held the weight of history. Every word, every gesture, every pause carried significance beyond comprehension. Amidst this, William's personal life also demanded attention. Catherine, ever the stabilizing force, had been quietly managing family matters, public engagements, and charitable commitments. Her perspective was crucial. She understood both the public optics and the emotional toll. She had observed Harry's struggles, sensed his isolation, and likely advised William on balancing compassion with pragmatism. Yet even her counsel could not simplify the complexity of the decision. There were no easy answers, no perfect solutions, only ramifications that would unfold over months and years. The emotional strain on William cannot be overstated. He was dealing with grief, responsibility, and a profound sense of duty, all while absorbing the raw vulnerability of a brother who had stumbled into desperation. Imagine hearing someone you love plead for reintegration into a world they abandoned, a world you are now tasked with leading. Every instinct in William's body told him to be cautious, measured, and deliberate. Yet, a part of him, the part that remembered childhood camaraderie, the grief of shared loss, the bond of brotherhood, urged compassion, understanding, and a chance for redemption. And then there were the private whispers of the palace. Staff who had witnessed years of tension, courtiers who had managed crises behind closed doors, and advisors who understood the delicate balance of monarchy, family, and public perception. Some feared that any misstep would be amplified, misconstrued, and weaponized in a media storm. Others recognized that a moment of genuine forgiveness could shift public perception, soften criticism, and restore unity in a family that had been fractured for years. William had to navigate these perspectives while remaining true to his own judgment. But the decision was further complicated by the history between the brothers. Their shared childhood, Diana's untimely death, and the constant comparison between the siblings had created an emotional minefield. Every word Harry spoke, every gesture he made, carried echoes of past arguments, unresolved resentments, and moments of closeness that had been interrupted by distance and circumstance. William could not ignore the weight of memory, nor the burden of expectation placed upon him by both family and nation. As he considered Harry's plea, William also had to anticipate the world's reaction. Public opinion had shifted dramatically over the years. Fans, detractors, and media outlets were watching every move, waiting for missteps, ready to amplify conflict. A single misjudgment could turn a private reconciliation into a public scandal or a moment of restraint into perceived cruelty. William understood that his choice would be dissected, scrutinized, and remembered for generations. In the midst of this, William's own sense of identity was challenged. He was not merely a brother, nor merely the heir to the throne. He was a symbol of continuity, duty, and national stability. How could he reconcile these identities while responding authentically to the emotional plea in front of him? Could he set aside the weight of expectation, the fear of public misinterpretation, and the pressure of tradition to make a choice guided by compassion, judgment, and love? Audience, think about this. How often do we face moments where personal loyalty conflicts with professional responsibility, where the right choice is clouded by consequences we cannot fully foresee? William's situation was magnified exponentially. Every decision carried emotional, familial, and national stakes. And now, with Harry kneeling before him, begging for reinstatement, William had reached a point of no return. Every instinct, every memory, every ounce of judgment would be tested in the next few moments. And yet, even as he considered the magnitude of the decision, William's mind could not ignore the practicalities. What would reinstating Harry entail? What responsibilities, duties, and public obligations would he be required to assume again? How would this affect charities, public appearances, and ongoing initiatives? How would the media interpret this act? Mercy, manipulation, or strategy? Every angle had to be weighed, every potential outcome anticipated, and every risk mitigated. It was a delicate balancing act. Compassion versus duty, family versus institution, personal desire versus public expectation. And in that room, all these forces converged on a single point: William's choice. Every second stretched longer, every heartbeat louder, every pause charged with anticipation. Could he forgive? Could he integrate Harry back into the life he had walked away from? Could he navigate the impossible intersection of family, duty, and public scrutiny without disaster? But what came next would change the course of not just their relationship, but the future of the monarchy, and no one could predict the consequences that were about to unfold. What would you do if the only person who could save your future, restore your identity, and mend a relationship you've spent years fracturing sat just a few feet away, silent, unreadable, judging every word you uttered? For Prince Harry, that moment arrived with the weight of every misstep, every headline, and every private regret pressing down on him. He could feel it in his chest, the desperation, the shame, the unrelenting fear that he had gone too far and burned too many bridges to ever come back. And yet, despite it all, he took a deep breath, knelt, and looked his brother in the eyes. Falling to one's knees before someone you love is a gesture loaded with emotion. It's humility, it's vulnerability, and it's a silent admission of one's own flaws. For Harry, the act wasn't performative. It was real, raw, and excruciating. Imagine being stripped of status, titles, and the public image you've carried since childhood, and having the man who once shared every childhood adventure now hold the power to define your next move. That was Harry, and the intensity of that moment is difficult to overstate. He began cautiously, words trembling at first, careful not to appear manipulative or insincere. He spoke of regret, not for marrying Meghan, not for moving abroad, but for stepping away from the duties he had trained his entire life to fulfill. He admitted mistakes, miscalculations, and moments of arrogance. His voice broke more than once, a sound that echoed in the heavy silence of the room. Audience, think about this. Have you ever had to confront someone with the full weight of your mistakes? Have you ever laid bare your vulnerabilities, knowing that the consequences could define the rest of your life? That's what Harry faced. Every sentence carried potential for forgiveness or rejection. Every pause could be interpreted as sincerity or manipulation. Every word was critical. Harry then shifted to his deepest motivations. He reminded William, and himself, why he had chosen this path. The desire to create a life independent of scrutiny, to protect his family from invasive media, and to escape the shadow of public expectation had all driven his choices. Yet he admitted, with quiet intensity, that he had underestimated the cost. Freedom had come at a price far greater than he expected: isolation, alienation, and a gnawing sense that he had abandoned not just his role, but his family. He paused, inhaling sharply, feeling the weight of every unspoken accusation. And then, in the quietest tone, he asked the question he had rehearsed countless times in private, yet never dared speak aloud. "Please, let me be a working royal again. Give me a chance to serve. Give me a chance to be part of the family I walked away from." The words hung in the room, heavy and potent. William's expression remained calm, unreadable, yet the tension between them was almost unbearable. Silence followed, long enough that Harry feared he had miscalculated, that his brother would stand, leave, and close the door to reconciliation forever. Every second stretched into eternity, the weight of expectation and consequence pressing down on him. What's remarkable is that Harry didn't just plead for himself. He spoke of the responsibilities he wanted to assume, the causes he still cared about, and the ways he could contribute meaningfully to the monarchy and the public. He tried to frame his plea not as a demand, not as an entitlement, but as a demonstration of commitment. He spoke of charity work, public duties, and the symbolic importance of family unity, all in a voice that combined vulnerability with earnestness. But this was more than a professional pitch. It was emotional exposure at its rawest. Harry confessed to the loneliness of his exile, the pain of watching his brother succeed while he felt irrelevant, and the deep, unshakable regret of the choices he had made. He reminded William of the bond they shared, the shared childhood, the grief of losing Diana, the times when they had relied on each other against all odds. He tried to tap into empathy, shared memory, and the unspoken understanding that brothers carry even when they are apart. And then came the turning point. Harry spoke of Meghan, not as a shield, but as a partner whose perspective had both guided and challenged him. He admitted the mistakes and judgment they had made together, but also highlighted the lessons learned, the growth achieved, and the desire to return with maturity, humility, and dedication. Every word was calculated to convey sincerity, yet he did not shy from emotion. There were moments of trembling, of voice cracking, a vulnerability that could not be hidden even behind the carefully chosen phrasing. William, for his part, listened. Every gesture, every micro-expression, every pause was scrutinized by the other. The room became a silent battlefield of emotion. Harry was exposed, raw, and pleading. William was composed, guarded, yet internally processing the magnitude of the decision before him. Could he forgive? Could he allow Harry back without undermining the integrity of the monarchy? Could he balance love and duty in a way that preserved family, tradition, and public perception simultaneously? And yet, even as he processed these questions, William could not ignore the symbolism of the act itself. Harry on his knees was more than a plea. It was a recognition of past mistakes, a gesture of humility, and a sign that he still valued the institution and the family from which he had distanced himself. But it also raised questions about power dynamics, pride, and precedent. Could granting this request set a template for future behavior? Would it signal weakness, strength, or strategic foresight? Audience, consider this. When someone humbles themselves before you, do you feel compelled to forgive, or do you hesitate, weighing history, context, and consequence? For William, the stakes were unprecedented. Forgiveness carried not only emotional ramifications, but practical ones. Charities, public appearances, media scrutiny, and the delicate optics of monarchy. And denial, too, had consequences: deepened estrangement, media scandal, and perhaps a permanent rift. Harry continued, knowing the silence was not rejection but deliberation. He spoke of the monarchy's potential, of the legacy of service and commitment he still wished to honor. He reminded William of moments from their shared past: childhood mischief, late-night conversations, Diana's guidance, and expectations, invoking a shared history that could not easily be dismissed. There was a rhythm to his words, a cadence that mixed desperation with rationality, emotion with strategy, and vulnerability with evidence of capability. And then, after what felt like hours though it was only minutes, Harry leaned forward slightly, eyes locking onto William's with an intensity that spoke of unspoken fears and hopes. He whispered the words that perhaps carried the most weight. "I can't do this without you. I need you, William. I can't rebuild alone." The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation, regret, and the electric tension of a choice that could define both their lives. Every heartbeat felt amplified. Every breath seemed audible. The cameras weren't there, the media weren't listening, but the stakes were global. And in that silence, William's mind raced through the past, the present, and the future. Could he find a way to reconcile duty and emotion? Could he forgive his brother without appearing weak? Could he offer redemption without compromising tradition? Every instinct screamed caution, yet every memory whispered compassion. And then, as the silence stretched to its limit, a decision began to crystallize in William's mind. But what William decided in that moment, and the way he chose to respond to Harry's plea, would shock everyone, ripple across the royal family, and redefine public perception forever. What happens when a private family matter collides with the machinery of a centuries-old institution? When the personal becomes political and the emotional intersects with duty. That was the reality for Prince William after Harry's desperate plea. The room might have been private, the conversation intimate, but the consequences were far-reaching, stretching into the corridors of power, the hushed chambers of palace advisors, and the very foundation of the monarchy. William could not make this decision alone. It was time for the Royal Council to convene. The Royal Council is a body few outside the palace understand fully. Comprised of senior advisors, courtiers, and legal experts, it exists to manage crises, guide royal decisions, and ensure the smooth operation of an institution centuries in the making. Normally, the council dealt with financial oversight, ceremonial planning, and policy advice. But never had they faced a situation quite like this. One prince, kneeling in despair, begging for reinstatement into an institution he had publicly abandoned. The council had to weigh tradition, public perception, family dynamics, and the psychological welfare of two brothers simultaneously. The first meeting was tense. Advisors entered the ornate room in hushed murmurs, aware of the gravity of the situation. Some were sympathetic to Harry's cause, believing that compassion and forgiveness could restore family unity and improve public perception. Others were deeply wary, arguing that reinstating Harry might undermine authority, set a dangerous precedent, and invite criticism from politicians, media, and the public. Every word spoken carried weight. Every argument carried the potential to sway William in one direction or another. One senior advisor, known for his meticulous attention to protocol, began by outlining the legal and ceremonial implications. If Harry were allowed to resume his royal duties, what titles would he regain? Which charitable responsibilities could he assume? How would this affect ongoing initiatives already under William's purview? Could Harry's presence create conflict or overlap with William's responsibilities? Each question was layered with complexity, revealing that the decision was not simply emotional. It was a logistical and operational challenge as well. Another council member focused on public perception. "The world will judge this decision within minutes," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We are not only dealing with two brothers. We are dealing with decades of public scrutiny, a media narrative that has painted Harry as rebellious and reckless, and a public that craves both spectacle and reassurance. The optics of this reunion, if handled incorrectly, could spark a crisis." Her words hit hard. William understood that any move he made would be magnified, analyzed, and potentially weaponized against the monarchy. Yet others took a more emotional approach. They reminded William of the human element. Two brothers, fractured by grief, misunderstanding, and the pressures of public life. They spoke of Diana, of childhood memories, and the bond that, despite everything, still existed. They urged consideration not just of duty but of empathy, suggesting that restoring Harry's role could heal wounds, restore family unity, and demonstrate the monarchy's capacity for compassion in the face of adversity. William sat quietly through much of the discussion, absorbing the conflicting perspectives. His mind oscillated between strategy and emotion, legacy and loyalty, duty and desire. The Royal Council's debates were intense, and at times, sharply divided. Some argued that Harry's reintegration was a potential liability, a risk to the reputation of the monarchy. Others insisted that it was a necessary step to preserve family cohesion and public trust. Every argument felt like a mirror of William's own internal struggle, magnified by advisors who had no personal stake, but whose expertise carried immense influence. And then, the conversation turned to timing. The Royal Council emphasized that any decision could not be rushed. Public announcements, media leaks, and ceremonial adjustments required careful planning. The stakes were not only emotional but temporal. A misstep could trigger weeks of speculation, unflattering headlines, and potential embarrassment for both brothers. William realized that even the act of considering Harry's plea was under scrutiny. Every pause, every reflection, every delayed response would be interpreted and misinterpreted. What made this meeting even more challenging was the information that surfaced behind closed doors. Advisors revealed details of Harry's recent behavior in the United States, his charitable engagements, public appearances, and media projects. Some highlighted lapses, missteps, or decisions that might reflect poorly on the monarchy. Others emphasized his achievements, dedication, and the positive impact of his initiatives. The evidence was contradictory, complex, and emotionally charged, leaving William to parse not only the facts but the interpretation, tone, and implications of each revelation. There was also the delicate matter of Meghan Markle. Though she was not present, her influence was undeniable. Advisors discussed her potential role, the public perception of her involvement, and the ways in which her presence could complicate or enhance Harry's return. Could William reintegrate Harry without indirectly endorsing Meghan's choices? Could he navigate public opinion that was intensely polarized regarding both of them? The questions were as sensitive as they were strategic, and every answer carried consequences that extended far beyond the palace walls. Audience, consider this. Have you ever been in a room where every decision you make could affect dozens, hundreds, or thousands of people? Where every word is analyzed and every pause scrutinized? William was operating in that space, balancing the intimacy of family loyalty against the enormity of institutional responsibility. His choices were no longer personal. They were national, symbolic, and historic. The tension in the room escalated further when an advisor presented a potential scenario. What if Harry's reinstatement failed to restore public confidence? What if it inflamed old rivalries, invited criticism, or prompted further media scrutiny? The council discussed mitigation strategies, contingency plans, and messaging tactics, each more intricate than the last. William realized that the decision was not a simple yes or no. It was a complex orchestration of human emotion, public perception, and the centuries-old machinery of monarchy. Yet amidst the strategy, a quieter, more subtle influence emerged. Courtiers and senior staff shared private anecdotes, stories of the brothers' shared past, moments of camaraderie, grief, and loyalty. They reminded William of Harry's dedication, his charitable impact, and the potential for reconciliation. These stories, though anecdotal, carried emotional weight, subtly influencing William's internal calculus. The personal dimension was not erased by protocol, it was enhanced by it, creating a tension between strategy and sentiment that William had never faced so acutely. As the Royal Council debated, a picture began to emerge. This was not merely about reinstating a title or resuming duties. It was about family legacy, public perception, and the future trajectory of the monarchy. Every advisor had a perspective, every argument carried a risk, and every anecdote had weight. William felt the enormity of responsibility pressing down on him. Could he act with compassion without compromising duty? Could he reconcile brotherly loyalty with public accountability? The council's discussions extended late into the evening. Options were weighed, strategies analyzed, and potential consequences forecasted. William remained poised, thoughtful, and deliberate, fully aware that one misstep could reverberate through the press, the public, and his family for years to come. Every scenario presented was a double-edged sword. Every recommendation contained hidden costs. And yet, the more William listened, the more he realized that inaction was not an option. Harry's plea demanded a response, and the stakes of delay could be catastrophic. In the end, the Royal Council's meeting concluded without a final decision. William left with more questions than answers, carrying the advice, perspectives, and emotional weight of every participant into his private deliberation. The room emptied, leaving only echoes of debate, the scent of polished wood, and the lingering knowledge that the decision he faced was unlike any he had encountered before. And so, the stage was set. Harry had made his plea. William had heard it, analyzed it, and now carried the burden of choice. A choice that would define not only their relationship, but the future of the monarchy. The next step, the moment when decision met action, was coming. And when it arrived, no one could predict the fallout. But what happened after William retreated to make his private decision would shock the palace, the public, and the world beyond imagination. When the world's eyes are on you, every action, every pause, every word is magnified, dissected, and scrutinized. For Prince William, sitting with the weight of Harry's plea fresh in his mind, that scrutiny wasn't hypothetical. It was immediate, pervasive, and unavoidable. The palace may have been cloistered, the council's deliberations private, but the media ecosystem surrounding the British royal family was an ever-hungry beast. Newspapers, tabloids, social media platforms, bloggers, and television networks were all waiting, anticipating, and speculating about the next move. Harry's plea, though private, could not be contained indefinitely. Whispers travel, walls have ears, and in the age of instant news and viral content, a single misinterpreted gesture could explode into a global story within hours. William knew this better than most. Every choice he made would not only affect family relations, but shape the narrative consumed by millions. The stakes were personal, yes, but they were also public, historic, and, in a way, permanent. The media pressure was relentless. Headlines had already constructed a narrative over the past years. Harry and Meghan as rebels, renegades, and media-savvy outsiders. Megxit had become shorthand for betrayal and rebellion. Every royal observer had an opinion. Commentators, biographers, paparazzi, and celebrity journalists all weighed in, speculating on Harry's motivations, William's reactions, and the potential fallout. Social media amplified every rumor, turning speculation into a form of public pressure that William could not ignore. Imagine being in William's shoes. A private family matter suddenly refracted through thousands of news outlets. Tweets, opinion pieces, and viral posts painted scenarios that may not have happened, or that happened differently than reported. Public sentiment oscillated wildly, one day calling for reconciliation, the next mocking Harry's vulnerability. One misstep, one poorly chosen word, and the narrative could spiral out of control. Every gesture in that room, every facial expression during private deliberations had the potential to be weaponized in the court of public opinion. Harry's situation only heightened the scrutiny. While he had physically distanced himself from the UK, the media narrative followed him relentlessly. Reports of lavish lifestyles, high-profile appearances, and media deals painted a picture of a man who had abandoned duty yet sought recognition. Analysts debated whether Harry's public image could coexist with the responsibilities of a working royal. Could he be reintegrated without inviting ridicule or undermining the monarchy's image? The question wasn't just hypothetical, it was strategic, and the consequences were high stakes. William was acutely aware of the scrutiny, but he also understood the paradox. Appearing too cold or indifferent could damage public perception just as much as being overly lenient. He had to navigate an impossible landscape where every option carried risk. If he allowed Harry to return, it could be read as a gesture of family unity or as a sign of weakness. If he refused, it could be read as cruelty or as a principled defense of duty. The media's interpretation was unpredictable, and the consequences could be enduring. Audience, imagine this. Every conversation you have, every decision you make, and every reaction you exhibit is amplified 1,000 times, dissected by experts, and judged not just by friends, but by a global audience. That was William's reality. The private drama unfolding between brothers was now entangled with international headlines, public opinion, and the machinery of modern media. Every choice became both personal and performative, every gesture a potential statement, every word a message to millions. It wasn't just traditional media either. Social media had become a magnifying glass, distorting and amplifying the situation in unpredictable ways. Tweets, TikToks, Instagram posts, and YouTube videos dissected body language, facial expressions, and even tone of voice. Memes, parodies, and commentary flourished, often blurring fact and fiction. William had to consider not only what he said and did, but how it could be interpreted, manipulated, and weaponized. Every private decision had the potential to become a public spectacle. And then there were the leaks. Even in a palace built on centuries of secrecy, information inevitably found its way out. Courtiers, staff, and insiders sometimes shared glimpses, tiny fragments of conversations, subtle observations, and carefully phrased reports. Once a hint reached the media, it could snowball into a full-blown story. The pressure to act decisively was immense because hesitation, too, could be spun as indecision or weakness. William had to navigate these pressures while maintaining composure, integrity, and foresight. Media pressure also forced William to anticipate public interpretation of Harry's plea. How would the public perceive a brother kneeling before another? Would it elicit sympathy, mockery, or disbelief? Could Harry's emotional display be seen as genuine remorse, or as manipulation designed to secure reinstatement? And what about William's response? Every facial twitch, every measured pause could be scrutinized, broadcast, and analyzed. The stakes were not just about family. They were about legacy, authority, and credibility in a world where optics often matter more than reality. Adding another layer of complexity was the global nature of scrutiny. Unlike previous generations, this drama played out on a world stage. International media followed every movement, every decision, and every statement. Foreign leaders, celebrities, and commentators offered opinions, creating additional pressure for William to consider the international implications of his choice. Could reintegrating Harry be interpreted as strategic compassion, or would it invite criticism from media outlets, global leaders, or public figures invested in royal affairs? At the same time, William understood the human dimension behind the headlines. Media narratives were one thing, private consequences were another. Harry's plea was not only a moment of emotional vulnerability, but a test of the bonds between brothers. He recognized that the public's judgment could be harsh, misinformed, or incomplete, but that didn't reduce the personal responsibility to act with wisdom, empathy, and foresight. Balancing media pressures with family duty was an almost impossible task. William's internal calculus had to account for every variable: the optics of reintegration, the potential backlash, Harry's sincerity, public sentiment, internal palace politics, charitable responsibilities, and long-term legacy. Each scenario he considered was fraught with risk. He had to ask himself, could he restore his brother without compromising authority? Could he protect the family while preserving the institution's image? Could he act decisively without alienating the public or undermining centuries of tradition? And amidst all this external and internal pressure, there was an emotional truth that could not be ignored. Despite the media frenzy, despite the public scrutiny, despite the centuries of protocol, William felt a fundamental bond with his brother. He remembered their shared grief, their childhood adventures, and the moments when they had relied on one another. This bond was invisible to the world, yet undeniable to him. It complicated every calculation, added weight to every decision, and amplified the emotional stakes in ways no headline could capture. Audience, think for a moment. What would you do if the world were watching your family drama unfold in real time, and every decision carried consequences for generations? That was William's reality. And now, as the media circled, as whispers and rumors grew, as public expectation reached a fever pitch, he had to make a choice. A choice that would be interpreted in countless ways, debated endlessly, and remembered for decades. Every angle had been considered, every risk assessed, but even the most meticulous preparation could not predict human emotion. Could William make a decision that balanced duty, loyalty, and public perception? Could he protect the monarchy while responding authentically to his brother's plea? Could he navigate an impossible landscape without disaster? And just when it seemed the pressure could not intensify further, a headline appeared. A reporter, working from a leaked source, hinted at Harry's desperate plea to William. Though details were scarce, the headline ignited speculation, commentary, and fervor across the globe. Social media exploded. Opinion columns debated motives. The world suddenly had a lens into what had been an intensely private moment, amplifying the stakes for William even further. But what happened next? William's private response to both the plea and the global attention would shock everyone, setting off a chain of events that no one, not even the advisors or media, could have predicted. What happens when years of unspoken tension, jealousy, and resentment finally boil over in a single moment? For William and Harry, the heart of their rift was not just about titles, duties, or public perception. It was about decades of sibling rivalry magnified by grief, expectation, and the relentless gaze of the world. That private room where Harry had fallen to his knees was now more than a plea for reinstatement. It was a battlefield where old wounds, unhealed grievances, and buried anger surfaced, demanding attention. The rivalry between the brothers had begun long before public scrutiny, long before the media frenzy, and long before the weight of their mother's tragic death reshaped their lives forever. As children, William and Harry had experienced the same privilege, the same public attention, and the same loss. Yet, the shadow cast by expectation was heavier on one than the other. William, as the eldest, was groomed to inherit responsibility, to maintain composure, and to embody the monarchy's continuity. Harry, the younger, was afforded more leeway, more flexibility, and in some ways, more freedom. But that freedom came with consequences. The public narrative has often painted Harry as the rebellious brother, the one who chafed against protocol, who struggled with tradition, and who ultimately chose a path that diverged from the monarchy's expectations. William, meanwhile, has been depicted as the composed, dutiful heir, stoic, disciplined, and unwavering. But what the public cannot see is the internal tension, the envy, the guilt, and the longing that built quietly over years of comparison and contrast. Harry's every misstep, every public critique, every headline about his independence was felt keenly by William, not merely as concern for the family, but as a reflection on the delicate balance between duty and personal freedom. And now, in that room, all of that history came rushing to the surface. William could see the desperation in Harry's eyes, the pleading, the vulnerability, but he also saw the consequences of past actions, the public humiliation, and the potential risk to the monarchy. Harry was no longer the carefree child he once knew. He had grown, suffered, and made choices that had both personal and public ramifications. And yet, in pleading for reinstatement, he reminded William of the bond they once shared, forcing him to reconcile the brother he loved with the man he sometimes resented. Audience, have you ever had to confront someone you love after years of conflict, only to realize that the anger, hurt, and unresolved tension is deeper than you thought? That's exactly the emotional minefield William faced. Every word, every glance, every pause carried decades of unspoken history. The emotional tension was compounded by the symbolism of the plea. Harry's kneeling was a literal and figurative act of submission. It conveyed humility, remorse, and a recognition of his brother's authority. But it also triggered something deeply human in William: the pain of past slights, the irritation of repeated misunderstandings, and the complex mixture of love and exasperation that defines sibling relationships. The act of forgiveness was not simply a choice. It was a negotiation with decades of history. And it wasn't just emotion that fueled the tension. William's analytical mind weighed every possible consequence. Could he trust Harry's intentions? Would reinstatement truly mend the rift, or would it open the door for further conflict? How would the public interpret the decision? Could the monarchy survive both the personal and public fallout? The questions were countless, and each one carried the weight of family, tradition, and global attention. Harry, for his part, felt the gravity of the situation acutely. He knew he was asking for more than forgiveness. He was asking for validation, trust, and a chance to redefine his place within a system he had publicly abandoned. Every misstep, every hesitation by William was magnified in his mind. He felt the weight of expectation, the burden of reputation, and the urgency of proving that his plea was genuine. The conversation escalated as old wounds were revisited. Words were spoken that had been left unsaid for years. Memories of past disagreements, childhood competitions, and unacknowledged grievances resurfaced. The dynamic between them was volatile. One moment a plea, the next a defensive justification, followed by moments of silence so tense they could have shattered glass. William's patience was tested, Harry's vulnerability was on full display, and the room became a pressure cooker of history emotion, and unresolved conflict. Audience, consider this. How do you balance forgiveness with accountability? How do you reconcile love with disappointment? This was not merely a family disagreement. It was a negotiation of identity, duty, and the legacy of two men shaped by the same circumstances yet driven down different paths. Every reaction, every pause, every word was both deeply personal and irrevocably public. And yet,